Hello, my name is Emma Snape, Special Event and Program Manager for the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage. On behalf of everyone at the museum, welcome to our virtual program, Virtual Gallery Talk, RBG's official Robe Jabot with Dr. Einav Rabinovitch-Fox. This program is inspired by our newest special exhibition, Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, presented locally by PNC Bank. Before we get started, I'd like to thank PNC and all of our sponsors and partners, including today's programming partner, Siegel Institute of Lifelong Learning, who helped make it possible to bring a first-of-its-kind exhibition like this one to Cleveland. The exhibition is currently open, and we're welcoming visitors to join us in the museum safely and in person, Wednesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're using best practice protocols such as contactless time ticketing, wearing masks, and maintaining social distancing to ensure a safe visiting experience for everybody. And of course, we also welcome you to join us from at home. On the first and third Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m., we offer a virtual online tour of the exhibit. Or you can also bring a group for a private online experience. Whichever way you'd like to explore the exhibit, you can learn more about ways to connect through our website, www.maltzmuseum.org. So thank you for joining us today for the second program in our series of virtual gallery talks related to the Notorious RBG exhibition, in which experts in their field give talks motivated by certain objects in the exhibition to explore different facets of the late justice's life. In today's program, Dr. Einav Rabinovitch-Fox will explore Ruth Bader Ginsburg's sartorial style and how she used her fashion to make a statement, looking at a handful of different pieces of clothing in the Notorious RBG exhibition, as well as many of the justice's other iconic looks. Einav Rabinovitch-Fox teaches U.S. and women's and gender history at Case Western Reserve University. Her research examines connections between fashion, politics, and modernity, especially in the context of social movements. Her forthcoming book, Dress for Freedom: The Fashionable Politics of American Feminism, explores women's political uses of clothing and appearance to promote feminist agendas during the long 20th century. In addition, Einav has published extensively on fashion, femininity, advertising, and feminism, both in scholarly journals and books, and in popular venues such as the Washington Post, The Conversation, Public Seminar, and Teen Vogue. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to hand the stage over to Einav.
Thank you so much, Emma, for this lovely introduction. And I want to thank also to Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage and for organizing this exhibit and for inviting me today. I'm really happy being here, even though virtually. And I do join Emma in urging you to come if you have the possibility to see the exhibition in person or to see it online. So I'll go ahead and start my share my screen so we can start the presentation. And my talk today, as Emma kind of like alluded to, look at or highlights one of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life features that maybe doesn't always get the kind of like the utmost attention, or might seem a bit frivolous given the immense influence her legal work has been on our life. However, what I will try to argue today is that Ginsburg's use of fashion and her ascendancy into being a fashion icon in her later life is very much connected to her more serious persona and serious role as a Supreme Court justice, and to being a very fierce advocate for women's rights. So we should look at fashion more seriously than maybe people done in the past. And when we think about fashion icons, however, we often think of someone, tall, beautiful, right, powerful women. We think of famous Hollywood actresses like Marilyn Monroe, like Katharine Hepburn, like even Sophia Loren, who in later life is still serve as an inspiration and look fabulous. We think about royals, right, like Princess Diana or Kate Middleton. In the American context, when we think about fashion icons, we think of Jackie Kennedy or Michelle Obama. But when we do kind of like when the word fashion icon comes to mind, a petite Jewish old woman who known for her fierce dissent opinions is often not the first association, right? And yet, while Ginsberg has always been an appealing looking woman, it was only in her later life, closer to her 80s, that she became a fashionable inspiration to a whole generation of young women who used her image and appearance to construct a new image of the modern feminist. And in this talk today, we kind of like, we'll see why. And indeed, Ginsberg's status as a fashion icon, which again came to her, she kind of like embraced it, but it came to her not because she was, known for her fashion choices, but actually taking a new take on a very conventional, some would say boring, right, Black judge's robe. But it offered a new way to think about the power of fashion in politics and the way we think about our cultural heroes. Well, no doubt, Ginsberg fame came due to her brilliant legal mind and her fierce striving for justice, right? It was the popularization of her image and more importantly, the commercialization of it, as you can see here, that really enabled her to move beyond legal circles and to become an important voice in society and a role model. And in a sense, it was her fashion choices and their dissemination in public that really turned her from Justice Ginsburg to the notorious RBG that we all know now. So Ginsberg's journey to becoming a fashion icon was not a self-evident one. Born in 1933 in Brooklyn, New York, Ginsberg belonged to a generation that had strict dress codes and espoused a more formal look than we're used to today. The 30s and 40s saw the rise of American design and the introduction of a new design language known as sportswear, which despite the name did not refer to more athletic or leisure wear, but to a functional, mobile, yet very feminine style of clothing that were suited for a range of activities. And sportswear appealed to the independent, on the move, career woman that really sought to be a professional in the world and that defy traditional norms of the submissive housewife. This style was also connected to the rise of a new collegiate culture in the United States when students, and particularly female students, demanded greater independence and freedom in their lives. And while Ginsberg certainly was not the only one who adopted this style or was at the forefront of it, it certainly suited her professional aspiration and kind of like her image as someone who's both independent and a lady. And she kind of like said that was the two lessons her mother taught her, both being a lady, which meant kind of like saying your opinion in the way that would be, that people would listen, but also independent. And sportswear style was really about that. It was about to present a professional persona as a woman. And again, without the need to forgo one's femininity. And for someone who was entering a very masculine field, that style was really appealing. And Ginsberg was always fond of fashion and also belonged to a generation that did not, were not afraid of color. And she also liked to stand out. And you can see here in the photograph of, this is her, this is kind of like an enlargement of that photograph from her years in Harvard. She uses her fashion and her clothing to kind of like stand out of the sea of flannel, gray flannel suits. And that was true both to her her student years, but also after. And also in her later life, she was really about color. And you can see here in a few photos of her, again, using this caliper outfit to make a statement. It was maybe also a way for her to balance the monotony and the monochromatic black of the robe. But her use of color was also a part of her belief that women need not to adjust herself to male standards in order to succeed, but to fight for equality between the sexes and for free expression of all. And she really stood out both in her fashion choices and in her legal mind. Yet fashion was not just a mean for personal expression. For Ginsberg, fashion was also a tool and sometimes even a weapon to convey her ideas and message and to make her voice heard and her presence seen. Ginsberg was confirmed to the Supreme Court in 1993 in what was then considered a fast process. We now know you can confirm a judge faster. And she was confirmed in a vote of 96-3 in also what seemed to be a very divided Congress, which I think says a lot on how much people appreciated her. She was nominated by Bill Clinton, and this image is from her nomination speech, Bill Clinton sought to diversify the court, but he was pressured both to nominate a woman, and specifically Ginsberg. She was definitely not his first choice, but he was very much impressed by her very quickly, and there was a very long campaign that pushed for her nomination. The reason that part of the reason why she was nominated was seen as a response to the nomination of Clarence Thomas 2 years prior. And of course, his scandalous hearing that were part of that nomination after Anita Hill accused him of sexual harassment. And the Hill-Thomas hearings, which again ended with the confirmation of Thomas to the Supreme Court, stirred public anger, mostly among women, who really identified with Hill and resented the treatment that she got in the Senate. And this anger eventually translated into a wave of women being elected to political office the year after. So 1992 was seen as the year of the woman because a record number of women were elected to the House and Senate. And interestingly enough, 2018 was also considered to be the year of a woman. And again, as a response to a very controversial Supreme Court hearing, this time of Justice Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford accusations. But it seemed that really these type of hearings enlisted a very anger and motivation for women to have a voice in the political system. So Democratic women were elected in a record number, as I said, mostly to the Senate, joining Nancy Kassenbaum of Kansas and Barbara Mikulski of Maryland. Three new senators came, putting a record number of 5 senators. For the first time, Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Boxer, and Patty Murray, 2 of them are still with us. And all of those women credited the Hill hearings as their motivation to run. And while these senators were themselves trailblazers in terms of fashion, Mikulski famously led a pants revolt in the Senate that resulted in changing Senate rule and allowing women to wear pants to the floor. The reason that I'm telling you all of that is that because Ginsburg nomination was certainly part and was seen as part of this wave of women coming into politics. And Ginsburg alluded to that in some ways in her own hearing through her fashion choices. And in that famous hearing, the Ginsburg hearing, she wore a blue suit with golden buttons that was reminiscent of the suit that Hill wore to the hearings in 1991. But unlike Hill, who was often mistreated during the hearing, Ginsburg used her time to affirm her belief in constitutional right to privacy and explain in some length her personal judicial philosophy and thoughts regarding gender equality. She very courageously discussed her support for reproductive rights and abortion in ways that I think none of the judges today will do. And through this subtle nod, through her suit to this female solidarity and this understanding of kind of like a representative of women, she signaled her position in the court and really solidified her nomination as a counter to the conservative Thomas. The brooch you see here that she wears would turn to be one of her trademarks as well. If the judge robe would kind of like be her formal wear to the office, Ginsburg would wear this brooch, and you can see her with the same brooch in the image from her nomination speech as well, to other public appearance. And it often been kind of like, it turned to be kind of like a marker of her role as a judge, even if she didn't wear a robe. So it was kind of like a civilian professional pin for her. And you can see here that she kind of like wore it both in official portraits, but kind of like it became part of her range of appearance. Ginsburg was confirmed as the second woman and the first Jewish woman to the Supreme Court, and always emphasized the importance of visibility and representation. She famously answered 9 when asked how many women would be the ideal number for the Supreme Court, right? Understanding that women need to be where decisions are being made. Joining Sandra Day O'Connor, both she and Ginsburg sought not to subdue their present or to be one of the guys, but to fulfill her representative role, as women justices. And for Ginsburg, the question was always how to be taken seriously and still stand out as a woman. And she used fashion to make that statement. She was determined to stand out, not only for her legal mind, but also for being a woman who reached the highest judicial office in the country. Both O'Connor and Ginsburg struggle with the question of what to wear for the court. Being one of the last bastions of male domination, court robes were not designed with women in mind. O'Connor complained that as the first woman on the court, the question of dress really bothered her. She didn't know anybody who made robes for women, and had to resort for wearing one from her days as an Arizona judge. All that was available, she argued, was something like choir robe or academic robe, and both signaled that even with something, when we think about a judge's robe that seemed to be very genderless, there still was a gender discrimination about that, even if not so apparent. And also, when we think about a judge's robe, right, as an article of fashion, the Black court robe creates uniformity among the judges. It was meant to make the individual personality disappear by blurring the body and making it a more institutional identity. The intention was not on the individual figure, but on the abstract notion of what a judge should look like. By blurring the body, the emphasis goes to the head, to the intellect, creating an image of minds detached from bodies. And while this image, again, might look genderless, it's actually not, and it's actually coded as male because only males in our society have the privilege to be disconnected from their bodies. Women, unfortunately, are still very much being judged and being viewed through their bodies much more than their intellect. So unlike women, this notion of kind of like creating this institutional identity was something that both Ginsberg and O'Connor was very much against. And by making these women disappear, by making these bodies disappear, it's also a statement and that sought to diminish in somehow, or again, this achievement of women who really disrupted this notion of how a Supreme Court justice looks like. And when Ginsburg joined the court, she was very determined in changing this notion. She did not want her body to disappear, but to make it more visible. Rather than taking the attention away from the body, she wanted to draw attention to her individuality, to point to the person beneath the robe as a way to remind people that the law is not abstract, but affect real bodies and real people. In an interview to the Washington Post from 2009, she explained why she opted to wear feminine colors on the bench. She said, you know, the standard of the robe is made for men because it has a place for the shirt to show and the tie. So Sandra Day O'Connor and I thought it would be appropriate, she said, if we included a part of our robe, something typical of a woman. So she and O'Connor began wearing these jabot, traditionally, again, lacy ruffles, very feminine, on the front of their robe, signaling a new female interpretation to the image of the Supreme Court's justice. By claiming a female image of the female justice, Ginsburg and O'Connor also invited other people to identify with them and to occupy it as well. And you can see here, even though it is a group image, both Ginsburg and O'Connor really stand out. This lacy jabot that you can see here was one of Ginsburg's favorite, and she wore it frequently on the court between 1993 and 2008. And she even appeared with it in official portraits, both group and individual. Another example of her lacy jabot is found in the exhibition that you can see here, showing her inclination of adornment and decoration. But it was part of her legal personality as well, and her emphasis that she's not just a justice, she's a female justice. Yet Ginsberg branched out beyond the lacy jabot and began to incorporate more bold, colorful colors, which did not only express her individual taste or mood, but became a statement of her politics. This change began in the early 2000s after O'Connor retired from the court, and much to her chagrin was not replaced by a woman. As Ginsberg left as the sole woman on the court, she felt even more obliged to represent her sex. She used her colors, which became more colorful from various forms and materials, not only to bring a feminine touch and energy to the Supreme Court, but also as a way to convey her message. To a certain extent, Ginsberg weaponized her look using fashion to promote her agenda. To her, each color had special significance, and she used them to create this persona for herself. One of her most famous colors, as you probably all know, was her Dissent Collar that is also on view at the exhibition. It was made by Banana Republic, and she received it in a swag bag at the Glamour Women of the Year Awards in 2012. And I think it's wonderful that that very famous color of her was part of a swag bag. That's a great story. And when she asked why she chose to wear it, she said with a smile that it looked fitting for Dissent. Ginsberg also wore this color a day after Trump won the election, even though there were no court decisions that day, again, using that to make a statement. And after that, Banana Republic reissued this color. I think you can still buy it. And again, it became an immediate hit among young women. Ginsberg also had a majority collar given to her as a gift by her law clerks in 2006, and she used to wear that when she was given the majority opinion. Her favorite color was from South Africa. And she wore it in multiple court photos and hearings, as well as in her own official portrait that is now hanging in the Supreme Court. Ginsberg wore a similar color, not this one, to Trump inauguration in 2017. And maybe fittingly, this color almost did not survive that day. As she was kind of like bundled up in the very cold January winter. One of the strands broke and some of the beads fell off, so they had to be fixed. So I think it was very maybe fitting to her state of mind when she attended that inauguration. But as I said, Ginsberg did not shun from colors and had a large connection of colorful colors as well that provided a contrast to the monochromatic Black of her robe. She wore them to the State of the Union address and other occasions. These were often gifts she received from women organizations around the world or from her clerks, and she wore them very proudly. This pride collar, the rainbow looking color that you see in the bottom of this slide was made in Ecuador and was given to her by a fellow at a Georgetown University Law Center. She first wore it to the court in 2016, prompting journalists to ask if she's trying to make a political statement. Ginsberg wore a more combative collar, look a bit like an armor, to her first official photos of all the judges in 2018 after the Kavanaugh confirmation. And together with this round earrings that she wore that looks a bit like a war shield, Ginsberg conveyed an image of this fierce feminist warrior, setting a subtle but clear message of what she thought about her newest colleague. And I think it's a really, a case of one picture worth 1,000 words. But collars for Ginsberg were not only political statements. She had also a large collection of collars that express her own individual taste and preference. These collars help her in emphasizing Ruth under the robe, again allowing her to stand out in the crowd and be an individual person, not just part of a group. One of these very personal collars were connected to her love of opera. Ginsberg was an avid opera goer and lover, and even received the honor to appear in one of the production of Donizetti, La Fille du Regiment in 2016, when she played the speaking role of the Duchess of Krakentorp. And you can see in the exhibition that opera robe that she wore and was very meaningful to her. But another thing that was meaningful to her was this collar that was a copy of one that was worn by Placido Domingo in the Met Opera production of Stefano. And I hope you can see here, but she got it from the Metropolitan Opera as a gift, and she really brought the opera to the bench when she wore it. There were other more personal collars that Ginsberg wore, oftentimes not for necessarily for court hearings or decisions, but to personal events. She used to officiate weddings of her family members and her clerks, and she oftentimes wore her more colorful and personal collars when she did that. So you can see part of those examples. In fact, the last collar she wore in her life, the middle one that you see here in black and white, was for a wedding she officiated on August 30th, 2020, shortly before her death. Another personal collar that you can see here was a 2018, gift from all of her previous clerks. And this layered collar made by M.M. Laufer refers to all the members in Ginsberg family. And on the inner neckline is embroidered a quote from Marty Ginsberg, her late husband, "It's not sacrifice, it's family." And Ginsberg certainly became famous for her collars, but they weren't the only fashion accessory she used to make a statement. As mentioned before, her floral brooch was also important to her as well, and she often wore it when she didn't wear the robe. But Ginsberg was also a fan of statement jewelry and bold earrings and rings. Which were, again, another way for her to add color to her appearance. She often preferred a more clip-on rounded style of earrings over dangling one, although she had them too. And again, they were part of her overall outfit, symbolizing maybe the lighter side of her personality. While Syme gave her a more earnest look, maybe, the use of color maintained a youthful look that again emphasized her femininity and her face. Ginsberg was determined to make a statement, again, not to blend with the crowd, and the bold earrings allowed her to do just that. Another fashion item that Ginsberg popularized was, of course, the scrunchie. Which Vogue credited her in turning into a powerful statement. Ginsberg's simple ponytail hairstyle became no less crucial to her than her jabot, and the scrunchie was definitely part of that. large and small, plain or ornamented, black, white, or in color, Ginsberg scrunchies became a feminist fashion accessory worn by models and other young aspirants who saw in Ginsberg their model. And Ginsberg began to wear those scrunchies ever since they were introduced into the market in the 1980s, but her persistence in wearing them and her growing popularity as a fashion icon in the late 2010s really brought back the style as a fashion style. But more than an item of fashion, it was really Ginsberg's role and ascendancy as a fashion icon and her role as justice that really made that item fashionable. And like her collar collection, Ginsberg also amassed an impressive scrunchie collection that was at least as big as her collar collection. So that also became part of her look. She also was a fan of using lace gloves that, again, taking a functional item and turn it into part of her signature look and fashion statement. She began to wear those gloves in 1999 after she went through a chemotherapy treatment for her colon cancer. Then Justice Sandra O'Connor advised her to protect herself and her health. O'Connor told her, "You are vulnerable now, and you're going to receptions and shaking hands with lots of people, so you should at least wear gloves." I think advice good for us, to all of us now. Yet Ginsberg confided to a reporter in 2015 that she liked wearing the gloves so much that she just continued wearing them and making, again, another signature, part of her signature look that also appeared at a cover of Times and in other iconic photographs of her. So this combination of colors, bold jewelry, gloves, and scrunchies really elevated Ginsberg into a fashion icon that was a status that began around 2012, but really increased after the release of the documentary RBG in 2018 that really described that phenomenon of how she became so notorious RBG. The interesting aspect was that it was really when she was in her 80s that she turned into a popular cultural icon. She served as an inspiration for a young generation of women who were indebted to her trailblazing effort and saw her as a role model. Her look became an inspiration to Halloween costumes, to t-shirts, to posters. But the power of Ginsberg as a fashion icon, again, was not necessarily because she had bold fashion choices or innovative in her in terms of fashion, but in her insistence to claim a space as a woman. Fashion industry expert Mary Lee Luther commented on her appearance, saying that it was very positive expression of her individuality, of her fearlessness. As Luther explained, for this woman who had championed women's rights, it's lovely to see that she's championing ladies' rights. It's okay to be a lady. You don't have to be a CEO with pantsuits. So not only that Ginsberg rose to her fame as an icon celebrating her femininity, it's also important to remember she has done it as an old woman. And in a culture that really extols youth and beauty, Ginsberg appearance made, in a culture where oftentimes all women are pretty much invisible, she really stood out in a way and conveyed brains and power. It was the fact that she was old and was experienced that gave hope for young women who often did not see role models like her in positions of power or in popular culture. And her ability not only to give a voice, but also a face and a look for justices was at the heart of the power of her fashions. In a society which make, again, women like her almost invisible, Ginsberg appearance stood out. And again, it wasn't for her a frivolous issue, but really a matter of power. And Ginsberg's ability to turn fashion into this powerful political statement inspire others to reclaim fashion as political tool. Female politicians such as Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi also harnessed fashion to construct an image of power and determination. Clinton famously claimed the pantsuit as her signature outfit, while Pelosi, like Ginsberg, also using creatively the power of bold jewelry, and ever since the pandemic, also of face masks. The younger generation of women legislators, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Kristen Sinema, also seem more open to use fashion as part of their political image and as a way to promote their own agendas. But Ginsberg also affected the Supreme Court. In 2009, when Justice Sonia Sotomayor was nominated and later confirmed to the court, Ginsberg gifted her with one of her Jabot as a welcoming gesture. Interestingly, Sotomayor did not appear to adopt that style, but she did appear in her hearings also in a blue suit. And Kagan did that as well. So maybe we do see a trend with Democratic nominated Supreme Court justices, again, as a way of solidarity. And although both Kagan and Sotomayor's kind of like did not follow with the Jabot or with wonderful colors, they too contributing and still contributing to really disrupting and challenging the image of justices as, again, the bodiless old men. Justice Sotomayor is known to wear hoop earrings and red lipstick, a tribute to her Latina heritage, and Justice Kagan also wear bold statement jewelry when she come to the court. So really looking and trying to form a new image for the Supreme Court justice. Amy Coney Barrett, who is the latest addition to the court in a very controversial hearings that replaced Ginsberg. Again, very different from Ginsberg's legal philosophy, but maybe very similar in the way she trying to use her femininity to reclaim this appearance. Wearing pearls, colorful dresses, a long hairstyle, Coney Barrett is maybe not a fashion icon as Ginsberg was, but she's open to bring more fashion and color to the Supreme Court. And she's actually the only judge today that really wears more ruffly shirts under her robe. And well, no doubt, the legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is far greater than her collar and lace gloves. We need to remember that this was also part of her image. But as a fierce defendant of women and minority rights who fought all her life to make a more equal and just society, Ginsburg, as a lawyer and as a judge, has made all of our lives better. And while her fashion and appearance were never the center of who she really was, the attention she got in later life, much because of her fashion, enabled her to reach larger audiences and really distribute her message to more people. I don't know a lot of teenagers who read Supreme Court's decision before Ginsburg became a fashion icon. Ginsburg embraced her status as an icon and really used it to advance others. And while she is still remembered as the fierce warrior she was and for her brilliant mind, And again, for unrelenting pursuit of justice, I think she's also being remembered as a fashion icon who really inspired a generation of girls to pursue their dreams and maybe to have 9 Supreme Court justices, women on the court. So I'll stop here and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Einav. That was a really fascinating educational presentation. I honestly didn't know that she had near that many collars. And so that's actually the first thing I want to ask you about. I really enjoyed that part of the presentation. I was wondering, do you have a favorite collar that you showed us? And if so, why?
Yes, it is surprising how many colors she really had. And given that she really had favorites, so she didn't wear them all all the time. She wore some of them a lot. I think one of my favorite was actually one of the collars she used for to officiate the weddings, the red ones, the flowery ones, both because of its color, but because, it was given to her by a clerk that she officiated her wedding. And she was like, I like it so much, I will just use it as my kind of like wedding collar for a while. And I think it was really for her, this personal connection that she had with her clerks, that really the colors, I think, shows that. So I guess that would be my favorite.
Awesome, thank you. Next up, we have somebody in our audience who is asking, do you know where Ruth Bader Ginsburg did her shopping?
No, but as you can see, and from her Dissent Collars, she didn't shop at, high scale. She didn't wear brands. She didn't, or high couture, right? She came from a very modest, mean family. So she kind of like, she never had this very glorious life, like we see Princess Diana or, Jackie Kennedy. And so she wore simple jewelry, right? Or simple clothing that was not necessarily kind of like a brand name, but was really about her personality and kind of like how to do the most for the least amount of money, right? Her jewelry, I think, do not kind of like, a very expensive necessarily, she was, a wealthy woman in the end of her life. But she wasn't poor by any means, but kind of like this idea that you don't need to kind of like wear brands in order to, and I think the Dissent Collar from Banana Republic really kind of like make that statement, right? That you can be so famous from, this store that all of us, shop in. Like, you don't need to be someone very special to do that.
Great, thank you. So another question that spins off from that one a little bit, but is asking again about the collars. Someone in our audience would like to know, do you know what collar she wore after Marty died? Was there something she wore to his funeral, perhaps?
No, I mean, she did wear the collar only with the robes.
Okay.
So she, and I don't think she went to the funeral in a robe. One of the pictures from that show her brooch when she was in this black dress with the brooch and her a necklace, a red necklace, that outfit she wore to the funeral of Justice Rehnquist. And she wore a suit to Justice Scalia funeral, who was a dear friend of her. So again, she didn't wear her official robe. So the colors were really about bringing color to the robe, and not necessarily. She used other jewelry when she was off the court.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna segue a little bit from just talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's collars, but to looking a little bit more at the precedent that she set in pop culture. And I would like to remind everybody in our audience that if you have any questions that you'd like to have asked, you can feel free to send them in at any time with the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen or in the chat to all panelists. So I wanted to talk a little bit about current female politicians. And so you talked some about Nancy Pelosi or Kristen Sinema or a few other examples, but who are using color really boldly, using fashion in an exciting, really feminine way. And so besides pantsuits versus skirts, could you speak a little bit more on if there are any differences that you've noticed between a new generation of female politicians in fashion versus an older generation? And is this a universal shift among women in American politics?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, I don't know if, I think it is more of a generational shift, although that kind of like Comey Barrett is not kind of like a fan of pantsuits. She wears kind of like more dresses to the court. And again, I think part of it is because Hillary Clinton really reclaimed the pantsuit in ways that kind of like now are being identified with the woman politician and with certain kind of like a feminist vibe that I think Comey Barrett, for example, trying to really avoid. Like, I don't think we'll see Comey Barrett in pantsuits anytime in the future. But we do see Kamala Harris likes suits. But Nancy Pelosi, you know, we see her in suit, but we also see her in dresses. And I think it is about, you know, a certain age, a certain kind of like generation that really is about kind of like, you don't need to look like one of the guys, and trying to be a woman and trying to kind of like emphasize your femininity. And even when you're kind of like a very powerful woman in politics, right? Pelosi's maybe the most powerful woman in politics today, and you know, she and Kamala, and I think so. I don't know if it's a generational thing. It's certainly like not like all younger women necessarily wear suits, and all older women wear dresses. But I think it is about kind of like, and again, Ginsburg was not kind of like a fashion radical, right? She always maintained this very fairly conservative notion of what a woman should look like. And although she wore suits, she did kind of like either by color or kind of like, or the dresses she wore, she is part of this generation that really is about kind of like being a woman meant looking in a certain way. And I think, you know, Pelosi is very much like that as well. But again, I don't think it's more of a, like, it's something that I can make broad statements on. It's more about kind of like really the political message that a suit or a dress making in a way.
That's a really interesting point you make, and a really interesting comparison to draw between Clinton and Coney Barrett. That reminds me of back as Clinton was running and immediately after, the idea of the pantsuit nation, that her like very enthusiastic supporters were taking that term on. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me that a woman like Amy Coney Barrett might see a pantsuit as being like very politically loaded now. And so kind of looking in that same direction of how clothes can be politically loaded, we have somebody from the audience who's also asking about the shift that we have seen in the past few decades from women as kind of objects to women as people in a political sphere. And they're asking, do you see this idea that we can view women as people with brains instead of just people in outfits as having changed? Or are Americans still focusing more on the clothes and listening to the opinions in regards to women in politics?
I think we're still, you know, we're not in that stage yet that women are being judged only for their opinions. We're still not looking at, especially on women, as bodiless figures, right? Even if they're under a robe or not. But I think in recent years, what we're seeing is more and more women are saying, okay, like if you're going to judge me by my clothes, at least I'm going to use it to my own favor and my own advantage and use it as a tool to convey my message. So, I mean, you can see it with Clinton, who was kind of like very reluctant at the beginning in her 2008 primary, right, was kind of like more reluctant to use the women's card, but by 2016, she was like, yay, like, as you said, like pantsuit nation, let's like, go for it, and really made use of fashion as a political tool. So I think women today are kind of like understanding that, yes, women are being judged by their looks, but that doesn't mean that we need to hide it, or but we can, it's another tool in the toolbox, right, that we can use to our favor. And I think women today are actually using it in much more interesting ways. So, and I, for one, I don't think that, like, I think it would be really boring world to live in if we're kind of like not gonna talk about how people look like and their appearance. I just think that we can also make this conversation about men. They also need to be part of that conversation, and they also need to learn how to use a suit. I think we can have a conversation about Biden, we can have a conversation about Donald Trump and other politicians. I mean, they are not, I mean, we don't need to stop talking about clothing, but just, start talking about clothing on everyone, not just women.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point. And so in the spirit of that, are there any men in American politics you can point to and say, like, this is a man who uses his fashion, his style really well to make a point?
I mean, I think Biden is really kind of like working the suit. I like his, he has a gangster style type of suit, which I personally like. I think it makes him kind of like more of a hipster. And given that he's very old, I think it's a nod to more younger generation and younger voters. But I think, Donald Trump fashion is interesting, not because he's a very well dresser, but actually because he's not. I think the fact that Trump very deliberately wore suit that were not in his size, were baggy, were kind of like the MAGA hats that really try to appeal to more working class electorate. Kind of like hiding is like, I'm not, this suit that cost, tens and thousands of dollars is actually a suit that maybe you can buy, right? Because it doesn't fit. And he's certainly a person who kind of like can afford a tailor and a fitted suit. And so it was very intentionally, I think, use of making that statement of like, I'm one of the people, even though he clearly wasn't. So again, not all men are good dressers, but I think their fashion is still kind of like worth analyzing in a way.
I never stopped to think about it that way. That's a really interesting analysis. Thank you. We have a couple of folks in the chat who are pointing out a couple of examples, but wigs worn by men in parliament as an example of a really intentional piece of men's fashion in politics, and also Madeleine Albright with the pins, the large pins that she wears. And so that brings me to another question that is going to shift back to Justice Ginsburg a little bit more closely. But did Justice Ginsburg state outright what her collars meant? Or were journalists and court watchers left to figure them out without her interpretation?
So on some of it, she did, like, and again, once it became kind of like people were like, oh, wow, she's kind of like changing her her colors all day. And again, the pride color did kind of like enticed question from a journalist. So some of that, like the dissent of the majority color, she kind of like explained, this is what I'm doing when I, do dissents. But some of them she kind of like, enjoyed of like being more kind of like mysterious about them and kind of like commented on them only when she was asked. And again, partly I think was for her, it was kind of like a fun thing. It was a part of her to bringing Ruth into the court and into the and into her profession. And so for her, it was like, oh, this is like a really beautiful collar. This is kind of like a very colorful one. So she had ones that were, again, personal because of, they were gifted to her, or like the Metropolitan Opera collar that was very meaningful to her, that she talked about it more. But she didn't kind of like, today I'm wearing, like, she wasn't doing kind of like the Oscar talks, right? Of like, today I'm wearing this and this and this. And oftentimes just when she was asked about, she kind of like gave, or in interviews that kind of like asked her, she was very open about like, this is my collar collection. And so you can, find some of those interviews even online on YouTube.
We have somebody in the chat has also mentioned Bella Abzug wore really large hats as a piece of intentional fashion. That's a really great example.
Yes, and for Abzug, it was really kind of like for her, and again, she's also from a generation of women who used to wear hats, right? That was the convention, and Abzug really kind of like emphasized, and she was like, I want to wear a hat because every time I go somewhere, I'm the woman with a hat, and people treated her respectively, and she wasn't. Because she wasn't the secretary, right? Secretaries were not wearing hats in offices at that time. So only women with hat were not secretaries. And for Abzug, it was really kind of like, I need to be taken seriously. And the way she chose to do it was with those big statement hats. So I think, and Madeleine Albright definitely had like an entire diplomacy through her brooches. She had really interesting brooches, and there's an excellent book about Madeleine Albright brooches. And I think, again, each politician kind of like, when you're a woman in this very masculine field, whether, Bella Abzug was kind of like the second woman in Congress, or a very first woman in Congress, one of the few first. Madeleine Albright was the first Secretary of State. So these first women, right, the women in a very masculine field are finding their own way of kind of like making their appearance seen, and making like, we're here and we're kind of like deserve the attention that you need to give us. And I think every woman kind of like finds her own chic and her own thing. For Ginsberg, it certainly was the collars, but for others, it was other things.
Fantastic. It's about 5 o'clock, so I have one more question before I'm going to let you go. But you haven't been able to see this yet, but I'm wearing my Super Diva RBG sweatshirt today. And so I was wondering, before we all go, could you talk a little bit about what Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her very public use of like athleisure wear, and the very visible role that working out played in her life at the end, what we can learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it was part of her kind of like diva image, right? Or this notorious RBG. She often kind of like, she was one asked in an interview, and she's like, oh, I know why I'm called Notorious RBG. I know about this rapper. And we actually have a lot in common. We were both born in Brooklyn. We're both used language to make our, she was kind of like, even though I'm 80s, like I'm really in the culture, right? I really, really understand it. And I think it was for her, again, a way to connect with younger generation of women. And, her athletic kind of like routine began as a way for her to be healthy, and her health was fragile later in her life, but really she was like, you want to make me a celebrity, let's do it. And, you know, there is now kind of like the Ruth Bader Ginsburg workout routine, like it's being published. It's something that her trainer was really kind of like, yes. And like, and she did like a lot of sketches with like, you know, she can do like 20 push-ups. And I think it really also made her, you know, the superhero that she was for a lot of people. Kind of like saw her as a superhero, and it wasn't so, but you know, they saw her as a superhero because she was, you know, this fierce dissenter and fierce warrior for women's rights. But she was like, okay, like if I'm a superhero, here I am, like, you know, I can do 20 push-ups, I, you know, beat 4 times cancer, like, you know. And she was, I think part of it was seen as like her kind of like, she's unbeatable in some sense. And so it was part of her kind of like celebrity culture that I think, again, a lot of young voters and a lot of young women kind of like really identified with.
I can only speak for myself, but I know that I actually learned about Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a figure from friends of mine who are my own age, who are just also young women who are interested in politics. And so hopefully that is the same way that other women are continuing to learn about her. So thank you so much, Einav, for your wonderful presentation today. I certainly learned a lot. I hope everybody in our audience learned a lot today. I would also like to thank everybody who joined us from home today. You can join us again in July for our next 2 gallery talks, in which Ruth Bader Ginsburg's lifelong client and friend, Stephen Weisenfeld, will be talking about his case in front of the Supreme Court, in which Ruth Bader Ginsburg was his lawyer. And again in July, we're going to be having Sabrina Harris from the ACLU come in and give a gallery talk on some buttons for and against the Equal Rights Amendment in the context of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her work with the Women's Rights Project. And so we're going to be announcing all of that and more very soon. But in the meantime, you can find whatever programs we have coming up in May. And soon you'll be able to find the rest of our summer programs online at www.maltzmuseum.org. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you again, Einav, for your presentation. And I'd like to wish you all a really wonderful evening. Take care.